The sun was slowly sinking behind the rugged mountains of the southwest, painting the wide desert sky in shades of orange and purple. A warm wind swept across the open land, carrying with it the scent of dust and sagebrush. A lone cowboy rode his horse steadily through the evening air, his hat tilted low to keep out the last rays of sunlight. His name was Ethan, though most people who knew him simply called him the Cowboy. He was a man of few words, a man who carried himself with quiet strength, and one who was respected in nearby towns for his fairness and courage. Ethan lived a simple life. His days were often spent tending cattle on the ranch, repairing fences, or traveling across the desert to deliver supplies. He had no family left, and his nights were usually silent, broken only by the crackle of his campfire and the sound of coyotes in the distance. Though he had grown used to being alone, there were times when the emptiness weighed heavy on him. Still, he carried on, guided by his sense of duty and honor. On this particular evening, Ethan was riding home after a long week of work. His horse, a strong chestnut mare named Willow, carried him faithfully through the canyon trails. The air was cooling quickly, and the shadows of the rocks stretched long across the ground. Ethan was thinking about stopping soon to make camp when he noticed something unusual near the riverbank below the trail. At first, he thought it was just movement of wild animals, maybe deer or coyotes searching for water. But when he looked closer, he saw figures. 3 women, huddled together near the edge of the river. They were dressed in worn clothing, their dark hair tangled and their faces pale from exhaustion. They looked frightened, yet when their eyes met his, there was also a glimmer of hope. Ethan pulled gently on the reins, slowing Willow to a stop. He studied them for a moment, cautious but curious. It was rare to see anyone alone in this part of the desert, especially so far from town. He dismounted slowly, keeping his movements calm so as not to startle them. The 3 women did not run. Instead, they stood up, their eyes fixed on him with a strange mixture of fear and desperation. Ethan could tell they were Apache. He had seen members of their tribe before in the towns and trading posts, though many settlers often looked at them with suspicion. Ethan, however, had never judged a person by their origin. To him, everyone deserved respect, especially those who showed him none in return. One of the women stepped forward, her voice trembling but clear. "Please take us with you," she said in broken English. "We will obey you. We will follow. Just don't leave us here." Her words struck Ethan deeply. He could see that their hands were trembling and their lips were dry from thirst. These were not women looking for trouble. They were women searching for safety. Ethan glanced around, scanning the horizon to see if anyone else was near. The land was empty, silent except for the gentle rush of the river. He turned back to the women and spoke softly. "What happened? Why are you here alone?" The woman hesitated, her eyes lowering as if remembering painful things. She said only, "We were taken. We escaped. We cannot go back. If you leave us, we will die." Ethan's heart grew heavy at her words. He could see the truth in their faces, the exhaustion, the hunger, the silent fear that clung to them like a shadow. They had been wandering for days, perhaps longer. Their bare feet were cut and swollen from walking across sharp stones and rough ground. It was a picture of suffering that Ethan could not ignore. He thought for a moment. He was a man who valued his freedom, who was used to living alone. To take them with him would mean responsibility. It would mean changing his quiet way of life. But then he remembered the look in their eyes, the plea that was stronger than words. "All right," he finally said, his voice steady. "Come with me, but you must stay close and you must listen. Out here, it's not easy to survive." The women's eyes filled with relief. They nodded quickly, almost in unison, as though they had been waiting for those words. Their shoulders loosened, and one of them whispered a soft prayer of thanks under her breath. Ethan could see the weight lifting from their spirits, even just a little. He walked over to his horse and pulled out his water canteen. Holding it out, he gestured for them to drink. The first woman hesitated, almost as if she was afraid to touch something that wasn't hers. But Ethan gave her a small nod, reassuring her. She took it carefully, sipped slowly, and then passed it to the others. Each of them drank with gratitude, their eyes shining with a mixture of relief and respect. That night, Ethan made camp near the river. He gathered dry wood and lit a fire while the women sat nearby, warming their hands. He gave them dried meat and biscuits from his saddlebag. watching as they ate slowly, savoring each bite. It was clear they had not eaten properly for days. Ethan did not press them for details about their past. He believed that when people were ready, they would share their stories. For now, what mattered was that they were safe. As the fire crackled and the stars began to scatter across the night sky, Ethan leaned back against a rock, his hat tilted low over his eyes. The three women sat close together, whispering softly in their own language. Every now and then, one of them would glance at him with quiet gratitude. He could feel their trust growing, even though they had only just met. Ethan's thoughts wandered as he watched the flames dance. He had always been a solitary man, never needing anyone else to complete his journey. Yet here he was, with 3 lives depending on him. A strange feeling stirred in his heart, a mixture of responsibility and companionship. It had been a long time since he felt anything other than loneliness. Now, for the first time in years, he felt needed. The desert night grew colder, but the warmth of the fire and the presence of the women created a strange sense of comfort. Ethan knew that the days ahead would not be easy. There would be dangers on the trail and people in town might not understand, but deep down, he also knew that he could not turn away. As the moon rose high above the canyon, the 3 women finally rested, their heads leaning against each other as sleep overtook them. Ethan stayed awake a while longer, keeping watch, his hand resting lightly on his saddle where his revolver lay. He was not only their guide now, he was their protector. And though he did not say it out loud, he made a silent promise to himself that night. As long as they stayed by his side, he would not let harm come to them. The wind whispered through the desert, carrying with it the soft sound of flowing water and the crackle of burning wood. The cowboy sat quietly, his eyes fixed on the stars, knowing that his life had changed the moment he stopped at the riverbank and saw 3 desperate souls looking back at him with hope. The morning sun rose slowly over the canyon, casting golden light on the river and the rocky land around it. Ethan woke up early as he always did. He stirred the fire, brewed coffee in his old tin pot, and checked on his horse Willow, who was grazing nearby. When he turned back, he saw the 3 women still asleep near the embers of the fire, their faces peaceful for the first time in what seemed like many days. For a moment he simply watched them, realizing how vulnerable they had been the night before, and how much trust they had placed in him by staying. Soon the women stirred awake, stretching their tired arms and blinking in the morning light. Ethan handed them each a piece of bread from his supplies. They accepted it quietly, eating with care as though each bite was precious. One of them, the same woman who had spoken the night before, finally lifted her head and looked at him. "You saved us," she said softly, her English still broken but clear enough. "We owe you everything." Ethan shook his head. "You don't owe me. You just needed help. Anyone with a heart would have done the same." But deep inside, he knew not everyone would have done it. Many men in his place might have turned their backs, afraid of the burden or of what others might think. Ethan wasn't like that. To him, helping others was simply the right thing to do. That morning, while the women packed the few things they had, Ethan showed them how to secure blankets to Willow's saddle and how to balance supplies for long travel. They watched carefully, as though every small detail mattered. It became clear to Ethan that they were not used to this kind of journey alone. He realized how close to death they must have been before they found him. As they set out, Ethan rode slowly, letting the women walk beside Willow. He guided them along safer paths, pointing out places where rattlesnakes might hide or where the sand was too soft to cross. The desert was dangerous, but with his guidance, the land seemed less threatening. He explained where they could find water, how to look for green plants that hinted at springs, and how to watch the sky to understand the weather. The women listened with full attention. Every word he spoke they seemed to hold in their memory. Sometimes they asked questions, and though their English was not perfect, Ethan understood enough to answer. Slowly, trust began to grow stronger between them. That night, they made camp under a wide open sky. The stars stretched endlessly above, and the fire glowed warmly in the middle of their circle. The women whispered among themselves for a long time. Then one of them turned to Ethan and began to speak. Her voice was quiet, filled with sadness. She explained that they had been forced to leave their homeland by outsiders who wanted control of their land. They had been captured, separated from their families, and made to walk far from the places they knew. But somehow, through courage and luck, the 3 of them had managed to escape. Since then, they had been wandering with no food, no water, and no safe place to hide. Ethan listened carefully, saying nothing as they shared their pain. He could see tears shining in their eyes as they remembered. He understood then why they had begged him to take them along. To them, he was not just a cowboy. They saw him as their only chance at survival. "You are safe now," Ethan finally said, his voice low but steady. "As long as you stay with me, no one will harm you." Those words brought a sense of calm to the women. For the first time, they were able to close their eyes that night and sleep deeply, without fear of being hunted. Over the next few days, the group grew closer. The women no longer walked behind Ethan. They walked beside him, helping carry supplies, gathering firewood, and learning from him each step of the way. In return, they offered him companionship, something Ethan had long forgotten. He found himself smiling at their small jokes, noticing the way they sang softly while cooking, and feeling a strange sense of family around the fire. One evening, when the wind was cold and the stars bright, Ethan taught them how to make a stronger shelter using branches and blankets. The women worked together, eager to learn, and when the shelter stood firm against the wind, their faces lit up with pride. Ethan nodded in approval, his heart warming at their joy. Yet not everyone they passed on the trail shared that warmth. When Ethan led the group into a nearby town to buy supplies, people stared. Some whispered. A few even muttered words under their breath about the 3 Apache women. Ethan heard them but chose to ignore it. He walked into the general store calmly, bought flour, beans, and coffee, and walked back out with his head high. The women stayed close to him, their eyes lowered, but they knew he would not let anyone harm them. The townsfolk might have judged, but Ethan cared little for opinions. He lived by his own code of honor, and that was enough. Back on the trail, one of the women spoke up softly. "They look at us with anger, but you treat us with respect." Ethan glanced at her, his eyes steady. Respect is something everyone deserves, no matter who they are. The women fell silent, but their hearts were touched by his words. To them, Ethan was more than a guide. He was proof that kindness still existed in a world that had shown them only cruelty. As days turned into weeks, their bond grew stronger. The women began to take care of him as much as he cared for them. When he was tired, they prepared food for him. When he sat quietly, they sang old songs to ease the silence. Slowly, Ethan realized he was no longer the lone cowboy he had always been. His life now carried meaning beyond himself. One night, as the fire burned low and the desert was quiet, the same woman who had first begged for his help looked into his eyes. "You gave us hope when we had none," she said simply. "We will follow you forever. We will never forget." Ethan didn't reply with big words. He only gave a small nod, but deep down he knew that his life had changed. He had gone from being a man alone to a man trusted, respected, and needed. And though the journey ahead was uncertain, he was no longer walking it alone. The desert stretched wide and endless around them, but with every step they felt less like strangers and more like a family tied together by trust. The sun rose high over the desert, glowing bright and hot, but the little group pressed on. Ethan guided his horse Willow while the 3 Apache women walked beside him. The days were long and the land was rough, but their spirits were steadier now. Each mile they covered seemed to bring them closer together, like threads weaving into the same fabric. Ethan had become their teacher. He didn't plan it that way, but it happened naturally. As they traveled, he pointed out hidden signs of the land, tracks in the sand that showed where rabbits or deer had passed, patches of green that hinted at water beneath the dry earth, and shady places where they could rest. The women listened closely. They repeated his words, eager to remember. Sometimes they laughed at their own mistakes, and even Ethan found himself smiling more than before. In the evenings, when they made camp, Ethan showed them how to strike flint to spark a fire quickly. He demonstrated how to stretch animal hides to keep warm, and how to cook beans in a simple pot without wasting food. The women in return shared what they knew. They showed him which wild roots could be boiled into tea, how to braid ropes from desert plants, and how to sing soft songs to keep away fear on long nights. Bit by bit, they were no longer just strangers who had met by chance. They were becoming something like a family, yet not everything was simple. People they met along the way did not always look kindly at them. Once, while passing through a small town, Ethan stopped at the blacksmith shop to repair a loose shoe on Willow. The women stayed just outside, sitting quietly on a bench. Curious eyes followed them, and whispers spread quickly. One man, leaning against a post, sneered and muttered loud enough for Ethan to hear. That cowboy's lost his senses, keeping company with them. Ethan kept his calm, focusing on the blacksmith's work. But when he walked back to the women, he noticed how they lowered their eyes, their hands tightening nervously in their laps. They had heard the words, too. "Don't pay them any mind," Ethan told them softly. "People talk when they don't understand. What matters is we know the truth." His steady voice calmed them. They lifted their heads again, their trust in him stronger than before. To the women, Ethan was not just a cowboy. He was a shield against the cruelty of the world. That night, as the fire flickered low, one of the women, her name was Tala, spoke about their fear of being taken again. "We ran far," she said, her voice trembling. "But fear still follows. Sometimes at night I hear footsteps even if they are not there." Ethan listened carefully. He understood that their fear was not just of men, but of memories that still haunted them. He poked the fire with a stick and said gently, "Fear doesn't leave quickly, but each day you walk free it grows weaker. One day you'll hear nothing but the wind." His words settled over them like a blanket. The women sat in silence, letting his calm strength sink into their hearts. The following days, their rhythm grew easier. The women began to help more, learning quickly how to handle camp chores. They fetched water, cooked meals, and tended Willow when Ethan rested. They no longer waited for him to guide every step. They began to move with confidence using the lessons he had taught them. Ethan noticed their change and felt proud, though he said little. Still, he remained their protector. He kept watch each night, his hand never far from his revolver, and his ears tuned to every sound in the desert. One evening, while they camped near a rocky ridge, he heard rustling in the dark. Willow snorted uneasily. Ethan stood, scanning the shadows, his body tense. But soon the sound faded and only silence remained. He sat back down, but his watchful eyes never softened. The women, sensing his vigilance, felt safe enough to sleep peacefully. As more time passed, their bond grew deeper. The women began to open their hearts, not only about their fears but also about their hopes. They spoke of wanting a place where they could live without hiding, where no one would chase them away. They dreamed of a small home with a garden, of waking each day without dread. Ethan listened quietly, nodding as they shared their dreams. "You'll have that one day," he told them. "It may take time, but you'll find your place." The women believed him because his voice carried no false promise. Every word he spoke came from truth, and they trusted truth more than anything else. But the world outside their campfires was not blind to them. Whispers spread from town to town about the cowboy traveling with 3 Apache women. Some called it strange, some called it wrong. Others, though, admired his courage, saying he had a heart bigger than most. Ethan ignored both praise and insult. His focus was only on keeping the women safe. But he could not stop people from noticing. One afternoon, while passing near a ranch, a group of ranch hands called out to him. "Hey, cowboy!" one shouted. "You planning on starting your own tribe?" Laughter followed. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he kept riding, not giving them the satisfaction of a reply. The women walked silently, their faces lowered, but inside they felt pride. Their protector had chosen dignity over anger, showing them strength greater than fists or words. That night, as the stars filled the sky, one of the women whispered to Ethan, "They laugh, but we do not care. You see us as human, not as less." Ethan looked into the fire and simply nodded. "That's because you are." The words were simple, but to them they meant everything. Days turned into weeks. What had once been desperation was now turning into a rhythm of survival, learning and trust. Ethan was no longer just leading them, he was walking with them. The women, once fragile and frightened, were now stronger, steadier, and braver because of the bond they shared with him. And for Ethan, something inside was changing too. The man who had once lived in silence now found himself surrounded by voices, laughter, and trust. His heart, once heavy with loneliness, was now lighter. He realized that he no longer saw the journey as his own. It was theirs together. One evening, after a long day of travel, the group rested near a wide meadow. The air was cool, and the stars shone brightly above. The women sat close together, their voices carrying soft songs into the night. Ethan leaned against his saddle, listening quietly. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace deeper than the silence of solitude. And as he closed his eyes, he knew one truth clearly. Life had given him something he never expected. Not riches, not glory, but trust, loyalty, and companionship. The desert evening was calm, but Ethan felt a heaviness in the air. For days he had sensed something following them, shadows that seemed too steady to be tricks of the sun, distant dust clouds that rose and disappeared. He didn't speak of it to the three women, but his instincts told him trouble was not far behind. That night, as the fire burned low, Ethan sat awake while the women slept. His hand rested on his revolver, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The land was quiet, but in his heart he knew the quiet was only a pause before a storm. By morning, his worry became real. As they traveled through a narrow pass between tall rocks, Ethan spotted riders approaching from the east. Dust rose behind them, and the glint of metal caught the sunlight. These were not travelers. These were men hunting. "Stay close," Ethan told the women firmly, his voice calm but steady. "Don't leave my side." The riders drew nearer, their horses galloping hard across the open land. Soon Ethan counted 6 men, their faces hard, their eyes fixed on him and the 3 women. When they stopped a few feet away, the leader, a broad man with a scar across his cheek, called out. "Cowboy," he said, his voice rough. "You've got something that don't belong to you. Hand over the Apache women and we'll let you ride on." The women shrank back, their hands clutching at each other, but Ethan sat tall in the saddle. His voice was even, without fear. "They don't belong to anyone. They're free, same as you and me," the leader sneered. "Don't play noble. You know what they are. They're runaways and folks want them back. You can't keep them. Best hand them over before someone gets hurt." Ethan's jaw tightened, but his tone stayed calm. "I won't hand them over. Not today, not ever." For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. The other men shifted uneasily in their saddles, waiting for their leader's signal. The 3 women stood close behind Ethan, their eyes wide, but not with fear alone. They were watching him, believing in him. The scarred man leaned forward, his hand resting on his rifle. "You'd stand against 6 men for them? What are they to you?" Ethan's eyes didn't waver. "They're people who ask me for help." "That's enough." The tension grew thick. The horses stamped the ground, the women held their breath, and the men waited. For a moment it seemed like bullets might fly, but Ethan's steady gaze and firm hand on his revolver made the men hesitate. They knew his reputation. He wasn't a man who bluffed, and if they pushed him, he would fight with everything he had. The scarred leader spat into the dirt. "This isn't over, Cowboy," he growled. "We'll see you again." He tugged at his reins, turning his horse away. The other men followed, their eyes lingering on Ethan with cold promises. Soon the sound of their hooves faded into the distance. Only then did the women breathe again. Tala, the one who had first spoken to Ethan, stepped forward with tears in her eyes. "You stood for us," she whispered. "You did not give us away." Ethan looked at her gently. "I gave you my word. A man's word should mean something." That night the fire burned brighter than usual. The women sat close to Ethan, their faces filled with gratitude and something deeper. Respect, loyalty, even devotion. They knew that he had risked everything for them. In their hearts, he was no longer just a cowboy who had shown kindness. He was their protector, their anchor, the one person they could trust in a world that had only shown them cruelty. Still, Ethan knew the danger was not gone. The men would return. He told the women as much, speaking plainly but gently. "We have to be careful now. They'll be looking for us, but don't be afraid. As long as you're with me, I'll keep you safe." The women nodded, their fear softened by their faith in him. They understood the risk, but they also understood his courage, and they made their own silent promise. They would not leave his side no matter what came. The following days were tense. Ethan guided them along hidden trails, avoiding towns and open plains where they might be seen. They traveled mostly at dawn and dusk, resting during the hottest hours of the day in shaded canyons. The women learned quickly, becoming skilled at moving quietly and setting camp in silence. Their fear had not disappeared, but it had been shaped into determination. One evening, as they camped by a small stream, the women prepared food while Ethan kept watch. Tala turned to him, her eyes steady. "You risk your life for us, why?" Ethan looked into the fire, thinking carefully. "Because it's the right thing. Too many men forget that." "I won't." Her lips curved into a soft smile. "Then we will stay with you. Always." Her words carried weight, and the other 2 women nodded in agreement. They were not just saying it, they meant it with their whole hearts. Ethan felt the truth of it in the way they looked at him, not as a man they feared, but as a man they trusted completely. That night, as the fire burned low and the stars filled the sky, Ethan sat quietly, his thoughts heavy. He had always lived alone, never tied to anyone. But now, 3 lives walked with his, bound by a promise spoken in desperation and held together by loyalty and trust. He realized something powerful. He wasn't just protecting them. They were giving him something in return: companionship, purpose, and a kind of family he had never known. The desert stretched wide and silent around them, but within their small circle a new strength was growing. They had faced danger together, and they had chosen to stay together. Whatever came next, they would face it as one. The desert was wide and endless, but the little group pressed forward with steady steps. After the confrontation with the riders, Ethan knew their journey could not continue the same way. Trouble was out there, and sooner or later those men might come back. He had to find a safe place for the women, somewhere they could live without fear of being hunted. For days they moved carefully. Ethan led them through hidden valleys and across dry riverbeds where tracks would vanish quickly. The 3 women followed without complaint, their trust in him so complete that they did not question where he went. At night, the fire was kept low and Ethan's eyes never stopped scanning the darkness. The women noticed his endless watchfulness. One evening, Tala said quietly, "You do not sleep much. You stay awake for us." Ethan gave a small shrug. A man rests better when he knows others are safe. Her eyes softened and she said no more. But in her heart, she carried a growing respect for him that words could not fully express. As days turned into weeks, Ethan guided them toward the edges of a valley he knew well. It was a place far from most towns, with fertile land, a stream of fresh water and thick groves of cottonwood trees. Years ago, he had camped there while driving cattle and had remembered its peace. He thought it might be the sanctuary they needed. When they finally arrived, the women stopped in awe. The valley stretched green against the backdrop of the red desert, its stream glittering in the sun. Birds sang from the trees and the air carried a freshness unlike the dry winds they had left behind. "This," Ethan said simply, "is where you can be safe." The women's eyes filled with hope. For the first time since their escape, they felt a place could belong to them, not as captives but as free souls. In the days that followed, they began to build a life in the valley. Ethan showed them how to set up stronger shelters using wood and hides. Together they gathered stones to make a fire pit, and the women began planting small patches of corn and beans near the water. They laughed more now, their songs rising into the air as they worked. Ethan, though still the quiet cowboy, felt something stir in his chest whenever he saw them smile. He had not planned for his life to change this way, but it had, and he accepted it. One afternoon, while repairing a fence post near the edge of the valley, Ethan heard soft footsteps behind him. He turned to see Tala and the other 2 women standing there. They looked serious, as though they had decided something important. Tala spoke first. "We begged you to take us, and you did. We promised to obey, but you never asked for anything. You gave us safety, food, and respect. We are not just following anymore, we choose to stay. Forever." The words carried weight. Ethan, who had lived his whole life moving from place to place, felt them strike deep inside him. He looked at the 3 women, their faces filled with gratitude and loyalty, and realized that they had given him something just as valuable as the safety he gave them. They had given him belonging. "You don't owe me forever," Ethan said softly. "But if you choose to stay, then this place is home for all of us." The women's eyes shone. In that moment, their promise was no longer born from desperation. It was born from choice. The weeks in the valley turned into months. Together they built a small cabin from logs and mud, strong enough to stand against the winds. They gathered berries, planted crops, and fished in the stream. The women made clothes from animal hides, sewing carefully by the fire, while Ethan hunted and tended Willow. Life was simple, but it was filled with meaning. At night, they sat together around the fire, telling stories, sharing songs, and watching the stars. The loneliness that had once weighed heavily on Ethan had lifted, replaced by the steady comfort of companionship. Still, he did not forget the men who had threatened them. He kept his rifle close, his eyes sharp. But as the months passed with no sign of pursuit, even that shadow began to fade. One evening, the women prepared a meal of roasted rabbit and corn cakes, and after they ate, Tala spoke softly. "Do you remember when we first begged you to take us? We were afraid you would refuse, but you did not. You saved us." Ethan looked at her, his eyes calm. "You saved yourselves by having the courage to run. All I did was ride by at the right time." The other women shook their heads. "No," one said firmly. "You gave us more than safety. You gave us dignity. No man had ever done that for us before." Ethan felt a quiet warmth in his chest. He didn't seek praise, but he understood their gratitude. And he knew that his own life had been changed as much as theirs. The valley became their sanctuary, and word of them spread slowly but quietly. Some travelers who passed through saw the little cabin and the cowboy with 3 women by his side. Some whispered about it in towns, but most left them in peace. Those who came close enough saw the truth. It was not a strange arrangement, but a family built on respect and loyalty. Years passed, and their bond only grew stronger. The women kept their promise to stay by his side, not as followers bound by fear, but as companions who chose to walk with him through life. Ethan, once a man of solitude, now had a home filled with laughter, work, and trust. People in nearby towns came to speak of him with quiet admiration. They said the cowboy who once roamed alone had built a life of peace in the valley, guarding those who had no one else. They called it a story of honor, of a man who stood against cruelty and chose kindness instead. And whenever anyone asked about the 3 Apache women, the answer was always the same. They had once begged him to take them, and he had said yes. From that moment on, they were never separated. In the end, the cowboy's life was not remembered for the battles he fought or the cattle he drove, but for the choice he made one evening by the riverbank, the choice to stop, to listen, and to take with him 3 desperate souls who became his family. The desert winds still blew, the stars still filled the sky, and the wide open land remained untamed. But in one quiet valley under the shade of cottonwood trees, a cowboy and 3 women lived with trust, loyalty, and peace. And that, more than anything else, became the legacy of their story.